in Gender Equality and Diversity Studies at the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies of Culture of NTNU in Norway. Currently, she is Deputy Head of Department and the leader of the study program on equality and diversity. Her main research areas are gender and gender equality, migration and integration, reproduction and family planning, family life, domestic and care work, human-machine relations, and robotic welfare technology. And she's currently working on a research project entitled Living Integration at the crossroads between official policies, public discourses, and everyday practices. We would like to welcome Guro and give you the floor to start your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to this session. I'm really happy to be able to do this presentation. You gave a very nice presentation of me, and I will talk about migration and history and gender and the present. I will say a bit about COVID-19 also, even though that is not my field of expertise, but it's quite relevant also for migration in the Norwegian context. So now I hope I'm sharing my screen now. So, okay, so nice to see you all. I want to start to say a bit about the Norwegian society as it is today, as what we call it, a multicultural country. For a long time, Norway was typically presented as a country which, due to very little interaction with the rest of the world, was characterized by a homogeneous culture. Today, we know this is not the case. Firstly, in Norway, there has been an increasing awareness of the national minorities, which has a very long history in Norway, such as the Sami. Also, there's been a growing number of immigrants in Norway, especially since the 1950s and onwards. Thus, the ethnic and cultural diversity in Norway is greater today than ever before. And as we can see here in the presentation, the immigrants today count about nearly 15% of the population in Norway. And in addition, we have Norwegian-born immigrants, Norwegian-born with immigrants' parents who count for nearly 4%. So when we talk about immigrants in Norway, statistically, it is about those who have immigrated themselves. And just to give an idea about the numbers, from 2020, which is like the first year of COVID-19, Norway still has 38 new immigrants. And here's like a table that shows like a figure. It's a Norwegian, unfortunately, but the green model is the immigration, and which is over the line, over zero, and then it's the emigration, which is under in gray, which is under the line, and then you have the net migration, which is in blue. And as you can see, Norway has more immigration than emigration, and it has increased more or less every year with a peak year in maybe 2012, but then it has also decreased a bit, and we'll get back to that later. And here, this is very brief also as a start, a figure showing from where immigrants are that are living in Norway today have come. So immigrants in Norway are mostly from Europe, but there's also quite a substantial part from Asia and then Africa, and then a few from North America, Southern America, and Oceania. And then a bit about the gender distribution of immigrants. The gender distribution among immigrants is fairly even. It's 52% men and 48% women. However, the group immigrants is so complex that even such a simple breakdown into men and women has very little meaning if individual countries are not examined, because the variations are large. Men are in the majority among immigrants from the new EU member states, such as Poland, Lithuania, and Romania. immigrants from these countries is extensive and recent and is characterized by a general trend in the migration pattern, the male vanguard that arrives first and as migrant workers, and then his family joins him later. Men are also in majority among newly arrived refugees, such as those from Afghanistan and Iraq and also Syria. In flight situation, men often travel in advance, while any family follows after. However, women are in majority among the immigrants arriving from the Philippines, Thailand, and Russia. These are primarily women who have come to Norway to marry Norwegian men. And here you have them. But all in all, the gender distribution among immigrants are quite equal. And also, as I will get back to later, even though it seems as if most labor migrants are men, we also have a growing number of paid migrant domestic laborers who are women. Very briefly, I just want to say also about the historical situation of, when it comes to migration in Norway. And I want to say something about the emigration, which is also an important part of the migration history. And the first huge emigration movement in Norway is the Vikings, which is a very long time ago. It was like between the year 800 and 1000, but then there was quite a few Vikings leaving Norway, both to do raids but also to colonize huge lands, and it was because of poverty in Norway and lack of land, and it was they wanted to go farming in other countries. Another very important also period in the history of emigration in Norway is the labor migrants who left Norway between the 17th and 18th century to go to Holland, especially from the western part of Norway, which was closely connected to Holland already through shipping. They went to Holland to take on new jobs in the growing industry and the merchant sector in Holland, and at that time it was both young women and men who left Norway and stayed on in Holland. Most importantly, though, is the history of the movement to America from Norway, and here the numbers are incredible. I think between 1825 and 1925, that is like in 100 years, more than 800,000 Norwegian immigrated to North America. And that was at the time about 1/3 of the Norwegian population. A few returned to Norway, but most stayed on there. And the main reason for Norwegian immigration to America were agricultural disasters leading to poverty and famine. And also, in addition, the agricultural revolution also put Norwegian farmers out to work and pushed them to seek employment in more industrialized America. So a lot of families left. It was both women and men, and also with children. And in the presentation, you can see the huge ships that took with them a lot of families. And you could see, like in the rural parts of Norway, it would be whole small communities that were left more or less empty because so many families left to America. So that was a big change in the Norwegian society. And due to this emigration, there's also still strong links between Norway and America, because a lot of Americans have Norwegian descendants. But then there's, more importantly, though, the history of immigration in a Norwegian context. And as for the immigration, Norway has a long history of immigration. It started very early, of course. It's been for hundreds of years, and I will focus mostly on the recent history, but I just want to say that the history is also long here. The year where it and I will get back to some of the details later on. 1966, though, is an important part in the history of immigration of Norway, because this was the year when the numbers turned. Like, this was the first year when there was more immigrants arriving in Norway than immigrants leaving Norway. So this was like, this is an important year. So I just want to see it. So while immigration fell, Norway began to experience immigration of refugees, though in the first years, very low levels. And it was not until 1933 that the country of Norway witnessed the arrival of refugees in a significant number. So this was just before the World War II. When Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933, his anti-Semitic policies resulted in the mass movement of Jews who fled to various countries for protection, including Norway. And it says that in 1947, Norway accepted the first organized group of 400 refugees, which was like right after the World War II. In 1953, after the World War, Norway ratified the 1951 UN Convention relating to the status of refugees and internationally committed itself to the protection of refugees. The first significant group of refugees that Norway received during the Cold War was from Hungary. In 1956, Norway accepted nearly 2,000 Hungarian refugees for relocation. Then the next significant waves of refugees coming to Norway was in early 1970s, when Norway accepted Ugandan refugees who were facing expulsion by the Ugandan president Idi Amin. Then we have the so-called boat refugees from Vietnam in the 1950s. We also from Chile was an important group of refugees arriving in the 1980s. And they also say that 1987 is called like a boom year. This was before the huge refugee crisis in 2015, but like 1987 is called a boom year, where nearly 10,000 refugees and asylum seekers entered Norway. So that is, to compare, it would be less than a third of what we have today. In parallel to the situation of increasing numbers of refugees, there were also in Norway an increasing number of labor migrants in the way of the Second World War onwards. After the World War, there was a huge need to, like we call it, to build up the society again. It was a lot of industry going on, a lot of construction industry, a lot of women were at home. Look, we had like, this was the housewife area in Norway. So there were mostly men in the industry, and they needed more people to fill the factories and do all the jobs needed. So a lot of men from other countries came to Norway as labor migrants in this period. And they came particularly from Pakistan, India, Morocco, and Turkey. And partly they were invited by the Norwegian government, and most of them were like invited more unofficially by companies who needed more workers. And at that time, it was men who arrived in Norway. They lived, they had left their families behind. Some of them were too young to be married. They lived in very small houses or flats, maybe 10 persons in one room. The wages were low, but still they were able to earn some money, so that they were confident that they really wanted to stay on. And after some time also their family came after. So this is an important happening in the Norwegian history of immigration, that we have this young men arriving 1950s, 60s, 70s, taking on low-paid jobs in the industry, and then having their families come after as family reunification. But even though they did an important job in the Norwegian society, it was also quite a big debate in the Norwegian societies if this was a wanted development. And as other countries, including Germany and Denmark, who had a similar situation, started to close down their borders in the sense that they did not want to accept labor migrants without a work permit any longer, the Norwegian society also decided to make a change. And let's see, so yeah. So what happened then in the 1975 was that Norway decided to close the borders in the sense that after this year you needed a permanent work contract to be able to travel to Norway and stay there. At the same time, there was also quite a lot of protest in the Norwegian society due to the increasing numbers of refugees. There was a growing popularity of in the anti-immigration movement. We had a political party called the Progress Party, which is still quite an important political party in the Norwegian society, who reflect the xenophobic sentiments in the Norwegian society. And we had in this period, 1980s, 1990s, the first really explicit racist small riots. So in the wake of these political and social developments, the Norwegian government passed the Immigration Act of 1988, which introduced strict border controls also in Norway that we have not had before. And even though this act is revised afterwards, it's still in action. So, but even though we have this immigration stop and we have this Immigration Act, immigration has, of course, continued also in Norway because we have still various groups and reasons that you can arrive in, and that is my next slide. But also to remember that the refugee crisis in 2015 was very important also in Norway, where Norway received more than 31,000 applicants for asylum. So this was close to the total number of asylum seekers Norway had received the last 3 years. According to the Norwegian, because as I said before, like we had this situation with increasing numbers of refugees and labor migrants, but then more and more regulation. And then, according to the Norwegian Immigration Act, all foreigners have to apply now for permanent residency in order to live and work in Norway, except for citizens of Nordic countries. And all in all, there are 4 main reasons for immigration to Norway that is lawfully accepted. And that is these 4. It's like employment for labor migrants, protection, that is the refugees, family reunification, and education. And the most important one is in number is family reunification, then followed by refugees, then work, and at the very bottom, education, which is by far the lowest one. And for education is both the students, but also the au pairs that I will also talk a bit about later on, as they are not in the Norwegian context seen as workers, but as students of exchange or exchange students, and hence as students. And then I want to say a bit about each of these groups of migrants. And the first one is then the labor migration. As regards policies on work migration, Norway, as well as the other Nordic countries and also actually the rest of Europe, Norway faced 3 political challenges. 1, handling an open European labor market. 2, attracting highly skilled workers from countries outside the labor market, like the experts. And 3, preventing the immigration of unskilled workers from the same or other countries outside Europe. And as we know, this is a complicating act of balancing different interests, and I will go more into this later on here. So, but the labor migrants here we can see, like on the picture or the photo on the top is a photo from the 1970s, where we can see what we then called the new labor migrants who came from, I think this group was from Pakistan, who lived here in a tent in a camping area close to Oslo. The second picture is meant to show, like, we have today quite a few Poles and people from Lithuania. They are the biggest immigration group in Norway today in numbers. And altogether, both these photos show like that in Norway, the labor migration is closely connected to the needs in Norway, and high activities related is partly due to the oil also, but like construction industry, fish farming, agriculture, which has made a constant need for more people in these areas. And quite a few of the labor migrants also live in urban areas where there's a lot of industry going on. But what we also see today in Norway is that work migrants are quite an important resource in rural areas. That is particularly the fish farming and the agriculture, which have a lot of immigrants. So they have changed rural areas quite significantly. An important feature to have in mind when talking about labor migrants is that they have been quite poorly regulated, and even though there's been a constant process in Norway going on to try to regulate it more, we see still that there is this problem with social dumping and low wage pressure. So hence, even though Norway know they need labor migrants, there's always a huge debate about how to regulate it best, both to be able to protect the rights of the labor migrants and to protect protect the national or the local industry also, which is competing. Then, just to mention it also, because in many respects the labor migrant seems to be quite male dominated. In Norway we have also had this increase in a part of the labor migration which is feminized, and that is the domestic labor, which is widely known all over Europe, and it has been for several decades. And for example, in the UK, it has been very important for a very long time. And me myself, I was once an au pair in England in the end of the 1990s, and that at that time that was something a lot of young girls did from all over Europe. In Norway, though, we have not had this history of incoming paid domestic laborers. We have, though, had an history of, like, for 100 years ago and onwards, it was typical that young women from the rural areas would move to the cities to take on jobs for families in the middle classes and upper social classes, like it would be cleaning and caring and cooking for very low wages, and they would be live-in carers and laborers. But the au pairs are very new to the Norwegian society. I think we had maybe a history of au pairs for 15 years, at least in some numbers. A theory in regards to this increasing occurrence of paid migrant domestic laborers in Norway is that it is a consequence of the high pressure about gender equality, because Norway sees itself as a pioneer in gender equality, and we score high on all indexes on gender equality, but at the same time it's clear that there's this in the Norwegian context, gender equality has been very much this dual earner, dual carer way model. But in the same time, it has been clear that it has women being out taking on full paid jobs has created a lack of hands in the private homes. And in the last 10 years or so, this has in quite a few homes this lack has been filled by new hands, and these hands have been primarily the hands of migrant women who have either been au pairs looking after children or home cleaners, cleaning the home when the dual earner and also dual career couples are out taking on paid jobs. So what we see in Norway is this ethnic and national stratification, which is closely related to social class, because the payment in these jobs have been very poor, and it has been also very poor regulations of the job. So the women coming and taking on these jobs have been very in a very precarious situation. And as you can see from this photo, there's also a home cleaner, at least I think she might be, wearing a mask, which is also an indication that the situation of paid migrant domestic laborers have been worsened due to COVID-19. But just to mention also that this new change we see here is also, it might point to a new cultural ideal in Norway, because the equality has been very strong in Norway. So we have had a strong culture of not so much social stratification. Class has not been so visible in Norway if you compare it to quite a lot of other European countries, but it seems as if this maybe is changing, and this increasing occurrence of paid migrant domestic labor is something that is signaling this change. Yes, and then I wanted to say something about the refugees. While immigration for reasons of protection is seen as a modern development, there have been several previous examples also of this. I have already mentioned a few before, like we had from Hungary, we had from Vietnam, Chile, 1980s, it was also from Iran and Sri Lanka, from the Balkan in the 1990s, and now in the last years like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. So there's also an important part of the Norwegian immigration history. On official data, it's the 4.4% of the Norwegian population has a refugee background. And this amounts to 240 people approximately. When we talk about refugees in the Norwegian context, it's the difference between the asylum seekers and the quota refugees. As an asylum seeker, you apply for protection if you are persecuted or if you fear persecution or inhuman treatment in your home country. And applicants must apply at the Norwegian border after making their way to Norway. And in Norway, new applicants will be processed at an arrival center by the police and the UDI, and following interviews and tests, applicants will be transported to an asylum reception center. And this is in a temporary accommodation designed to house asylum seekers where they wait for a decision. The time it takes to have this decision varies a lot. It has been quite a lot of critique because for some it has taken years, but it's have been a strong pressure in Norway to try to reduce this time so that people can start living their life in Norway, or they will be exported. A difference between Norway and, for example, Greece is that we don't have refugee camps. And of course, the numbers of refugees arriving in Norway is also much lower. When it comes to the quota refugees, they are overseen by the UNHCR. The European resettlement system allocates refugees across European countries. Individual asylum seekers cannot request a transfer to Norway. The number of resettlement refugees, which are also called quota refugees, that will be accepted each year in Norway is decided by the government. And to give you a number, in 2019, it was approximately 3,000 quotas accepted. So Norway follows the UN's recommendation regarding priority situation, offering a geographically dispersed program including children, women and men of various nationalities, faith, sexual orientation, etc. And then there's the family migration. Family migration is the migration of family members to either form a family or reunite with the family members. Family migration can thus mean immigration by which residents in the receiving country are united with immediate family members who are living in another country. This is often referred to as family reunion, the completion or relocation of a family. Marriage migration also falls under the category of family migration. Marriage migration refers to the migration of one partner to the country of the residency of the spouse. And here we can see the different categories of family migration. And I don't think I need to read them aloud, but here you can see that. In addition, like it's the children of residents, the parents or guardians, and partner who is married. And sometimes it's also possible to have a family migration with all the parents, but that has been quite strict in Norway. And then I want to say a few words about residency and integration. And as in the rest of Europe, the main word when it comes to the policy of immigration when people have arrived in Norway is integration. So in Norway, a national policy of there is a national policy of dispersed refugee settlement, and this was initiated in the 1990s as a strategy to reduce the concentration of refugees in bigger cities. Because in Norway, we have, as in most other countries, also a concentration of immigrants in big cities. In big cities, there are more houses, more jobs, there are universities, there are airports, and also there's a more heterogeneous or multicultural society, which is attracting more immigrants. But in Norway, as we have a lot of rural areas, the national policies for settlement when it comes to refugees is to have the refugees spread over the country, and then we have what they call a dispersed refugee settlement. And it says that the idea is that the refugees should be spread all over the country to make it more to avoid what they call ghettos, and also to increase the possibility of more interaction between immigrants and the overall population. And the way the government is regulating this is that each refugee, when being given a residency, being granted residency, they are told where to go. They will be given a municipality where they need to go. And in this municipality, they are given the possibility to learn the Norwegian language, to have some kind of education, and also some kind of, I call it periods where they can be in different workplaces to be increase their possibilities to have paid jobs. And the whole idea about which is behind this integration system is the aim of being that the immigrants should be able to be given paid jobs. So it's all about employment, really. Also, it's just very strong in the Norwegian integration policy. So whereas the refugees are settled also in rural areas by the authorities, we also see in Norway that the growing industries in rural areas also attract labor migrants. So in quite a few smaller municipalities in rural areas, there are substantial amount of labor migrants. And in these rural areas, population decline is a big issue, so they are very much welcomed in these societies, both refugees and labor migrants. Yes, and I can say that refugees who are approved to become residents of Norway have the opportunity to become permanent residents and citizens in due course. This matters because those in Norway under the asylum process are offered protection for as long as it is required. If the situation in their home country changes, they can be required to return. And during the 2020, the period of residency required to apply for permanent residency status was increased. Together with proof of Norwegian proficiency, like you need to be very good in Norwegian language, refugees and their family members must now be living in Norway for 5 years before they can apply for permanent residency. As with other groups of immigrants, citizenship is possible after 7 years. This requires the successful completion of citizenship tests, among other requirements. And then this citizenship test is quite a lot discussed in Norway also, and quite a few Norwegian without immigration background have tried to take the test, and they can see that it's quite hard actually to succeed. I have tried it myself and I did pass, but it's obvious for me that it's not easy to pass. So you really need to study quite a lot about the Norwegian culture, the Norwegian society, and the Norwegian language to be able to pass. That's also one way of regulating immigration. I also want to mention something about the attitudes towards immigrants and immigration in Norway. As I said before, we have had small riots of racist actions against immigration and immigrants, and there's no doubt that there is a lot of racism also in Norway, and also a lot of resistance against immigrants and immigration. And this is a big topic both in public debate and in research. At the same time, research also points to that all in all, Norwegian citizens are quite positive to immigration also. More and more respond, there's a survey that is done every year, and in this survey we see that more and more people respond that they think that immigrants is a useful contribution in working life, and that they also think that immigrants should have the same opportunities for work as Norwegians. Also, fewer people are thinking that most immigrants abuse the Norwegian welfare system, and immigrants are to a lesser degree being perceived as a source of insecurity in the Norwegian society. I don't have the exact numbers here, but the general impression also found in a lot of research is that a lot of Norwegians are quite positive towards immigrants, and maybe also that is because I can't remember the English word, but there's very few Norwegians, or in the Norwegian society, there's very few not having a paid job. So most people who want a paid job, they're able to get it. And because of that, I think it's easier to be positive towards new groups of migrants, both refugees and labor migrants. And also my own research from talking to mayors in different municipalities in rural areas in Norway, we also see that the rural areas, they see immigrants as an important resource, both when it comes to demography, like more people, but also the competence they bring with them and the work they are doing while being there. And we see also that quite a few immigrants settling in Norway, also in rural areas, tend to stay on in the same areas where they were settled in the first place. And then it's the immigration under COVID-19, which I must say I feel most insecure, because there's not very, the knowledge in this field is still preliminary, and a lot of numbers are still lacking. But what you can see then, firstly, I want to say that labor migration in the Norwegian context has been some sort of a hot potato under COVID-19. In the beginning, there were not much willingness among the Norwegian government to restrict labor migration, because labor migrants are so important for the Norwegian industry. So even though the Norwegian schools were closed down and a lot of people were in home offices, and there was quite strict regulations on the private life in Norway, labor migrants were still able to go to and forth their home country and Norway. They were, of course, needed to go into quarantine, but it was not very strictly regulated, and it was not actually followed up on. So, but as time has passed, it has been more and more strict. So now labor migration is much more restricted than it used to be in 2000 or last year. And also there are much more policing of the quarantine now than it used to be. So what we see now is that the labor migration is much more restricted and also much more closely followed from the government. What we also see that due to the COVID-19, there has been much lower numbers of asylum seekers arriving in Norway, which is probably because travels have been much more difficult, and it has been restricting all over the world. And also we see that there's much lower number of resettlement refugees. So a lot of the immigration processes have actually stopped or paused, and that also counts for the family reunification. So a lot of people who thought they were just about to get to Norway to be reunited with the family has not been able to do so due to COVID-19. But it has not stopped absolutely. So there are people coming, and the tendencies seem to be that it's opening up more and more these days. This is my very last slide, and what I also wanted to say is this is about COVID-19 and migration, but it's about the immigrants already living in Norway. Because what we see now is that the prevalence of COVID-19 is much higher among immigrants and than about the rest of the population. So more immigrants seem to be infected by COVID-19. More immigrants are also hospitalized due to COVID-19, and it also seems that more immigrants are dying from COVID-19 than the rest of the population, or those born in Norway. And there's a lot of theories why this is so. One theory is that more immigrants than the rest are living in small flats with extended families, and that they are infecting each other to a greater extent than the rest of the society. But we don't know if that is the case. There's also been theories regarding age, gender, and the place of residence. For example, that more immigrants live in areas in Oslo where there are more infection. It seems as if the information about COVID-19 and the way it is you are infected and what you can do about it has not really succeeded in reaching out to all immigrants. It took months before the government started to inform about COVID-19 in different languages, and they also see that it might be important to do other kinds of information campaigns than they used to do to the population as such. And it also seems as if the tracing strategies for COVID-19, like infection, has not really succeeded among immigrants. So I don't know if this is the correct word in English, but like this tracing offices have not been able to find to identify the networks when immigrants have been infected by COVID-19. So in Norway today, this is a big discussion, in particular because it has been Ramadan this month and it's Eid, and they can see that it's the celebration of Eid could be an area where the numbers would be rising also when it comes to COVID-19. So maybe this is one of the most present topic when it comes to COVID-19 and immigration in Norway today is this differences in the higher prevalence of COVID among immigrants and what to do about it, and could it be avoided, and is this also a signal of stratification and something that should be improved to avoid a situation like this in the future. So I think I'll stop my presentation there. Sorry for my struggling with finding the English words. I hope you were able to follow me still.
Thank you very much, Guru. This was great. I think your English is wonderful. You shouldn't worry about that. We were able to understand the whole presentation, and I'm sure people have questions and comments to make, because I think that the situation is very different in Greece, but also there are continuities and connections between different countries in Europe. After all, this is a project funded by the EA funds, and I think it's important also to address these interconnections, how different the migration system works at the European level, including Norway. And I think we can explore these further in our discussion. I would like to ask you all to use the raise your hand button if you want to speak, or to send me a message on the chat in order to give you the floor to make comments or questions. We already have some comments on the chat, and I would also like to remind those of you who do not feel confident to ask questions in English that you can also write your questions in Greek on the chat and we can translate them for Guru, or your comments or whatever else you want to ask or say. So first of all, we have a comment from Mariana. There is no name. And Mariana, would you like to speak, or shall I read your message? I think
I would like to say that the ideas of another European unity is so clever, and we have to follow these ideas. I would like to say that a country which is not create a ghetto of immigrants succeed. Another one does not succeed.
Mm-hmm. So it's important. Your comment is that it is so important not to create ghettos of immigrants. Take the example of Greece. There's such a clever system. Everyone lives. I think that maybe we should clarify a little bit. The situation in Greece is very complex at the moment. On the one hand, in previous years there have been areas of urban areas that have been there have been a lot of migrants living in those areas, but they have been part of the urban space. They have not been, let's say, isolated like the banlieue in France, for example. So in the center of Athens, there are several areas that are populated by migrants of different nationalities, but they're not cut off from the urban space and from the rest of the city. So, but it is very common in the Greek language to use the term ghetto in the sense that there is social and economic inequalities, and also in terms of how space is regulated in those areas that are migrant. We have a lot of migrants living, but we don't have ghettos in the strict sense of the word as in the US or in the banlieue in France. The other thing is that, of course, as you mentioned, we have camps where refugees, asylum seekers, and those who apply for residence permits are stuck for many years. They're not allowed to leave, and especially now with COVID, these are closed and people cannot leave. So we have these two different types of issues that are emerging. So we have another speaker, another Helen Hammer. Would you like to say a few words?
Hello, everybody. It was wonderful to attend the Gyros speech. And from my positioning, the privileged one of being and having had gender studies in the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, I want to make some comments. The first comment is about the ghettos that were mentioned, and the policies that are trying to prevent them from happening.
I think, Ellen, your
challenges.
You were frozen for a while and we couldn't hear. Can you start again?
Yes.
We heard the first part that you want to speak about the ghettos, but then we didn't hear the rest of the.
Yes. I was saying that we need to keep in mind that we are standing ahead an era that will be really the meaning of this era will be outstanding for the years to come, because we are living in societies that are multicultural, but that doesn't mean that the countries respond to this as a phenomenon the way they should. That the countries are multicultural, but that doesn't mean that politicians do the things to make the conditions of a multicultural society obtain their content. And here is where I want to say that even the idea of creating policies that will prevent ghettos from existing is pretty much associated with the notion that Blackness, and I say this very consciously, is linked to poverty, ghetto forming, and so on. It is a joke going around stating that they have a Black person having a headache, and there you will get policies that will prevent the Black people from getting headaches. I think this is a very important thing to keep in mind. And standing by the side of each other, thinking what societies we're about to be living in, because the world is not going to look the same in the future, and the people are not going to be the same. Our bodies are displaying their characteristics, and now lately, eventually, the social anthropology studies are putting light on the fact, on the body itself. The body that was something like a black box back in time is now in full display, is theoretized, is written off. So we can't be claiming that we are moving within the spaces we're moving, like in transparencies, in I forgot the word because my Norwegian is intervening, but I believe you all understand that I'm trying to say that we are not invisible in our contexts. So living in Norway, for me, it has been very challenging, but at the same time, very mind-blowing in multiple ways. The last thing that I want to put here, and which I believe it is very important to share with you, is that in Norway, the discussion for equality has been always in the things of the press, and it has always been relevant. Even last year, when the COVID pandemic outbreak broke, still the cultural department of the country was publishing policies about equality. Now keep this in mind and see that we have reached an area where equality is the most important thing and one of the products that this country, Norway, has to contribute with the rest of the world. And keep in mind where Greece is situated in this chart. I now believe that the years to come shouldn't be making this country following sweaty in order to be standing by the progress that Norway have done. It is very important to make these procedures almost fast. To understand this thing, but we need to make this space go faster in order to cover it. I'm very sorry, and my English is so poor, and I'm reading and writing an exam right now, so please forgive me for being so messy. That was what I wanted to say, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. I mean, your experience is useful, I think, for all of us. And now we have Maria Stratigaki and then Danai Vlahu. And then
Okay,
Guro.
hello. I would like to thank Guro Korsnes Kirstesen on behalf also of the organizers of this project and this event, the Center for Gender Studies of Panteion University. So I think, thank you very much for your speech. In fact, what I liked very much is that you gave an overview, a very comprehensive overview of migration, including also the history and the migration, immigration, emigration. Sometimes this shows very well that it's a constant move of people, and it's sometimes we think that it's only something very strange or very only for now, but we understand that the whole thing is something that connected with the past, and I think it was very, very useful. I think that between Greece and Norway, as Nelly said, there are so many differences, not only geographical, but also social and all these things. And we all know also gender equality standards are different and so on. I would like to highlight and ask you if you could say something more. I would like to highlight two points. One, about what you have said about au pair girls, au pair women who come to take care of the children, and domestic also some domestic tasks. In Greece, we have a lot of migrant women taking all these tasks, but also in Greece, we have these women are working for very, very much in the caring of the elderly, the elderly, the sick people, the disabled. So there is a whole work of care that is done in addition to what it is in Norway. So I think this is related to the social system you have. And but I would like to know a little bit more. All this care of the dependent, except the children, that is not, I mean, except the children, all this care is done, is undertaken by formal, by state organizations, hospitals, or whatever, because in Greece it's a very, very big difference in that. So this is for the past. And the other one for the present situation, about the refugees, the asylum seekers of the last flow from Turkey. Of course, we had completely different numbers between Norway and Greece. You cannot compare. But however, I was impressed by the idea that in order to achieve integration, not only you take care of, let's say, you provide some basic needs, or you satisfy some basic needs, but also you provide work, and also you allocate, I mean, in Norway, you allocate people in different municipalities. And this means that there is a central planning about where to put whatever, how many you have, but of course, much more organized than what happens in Greece, that there was never such a plan of, let's say, distribution around, all over the country. And I think it's very, very important to see. It happened also in Germany, where the numbers were very, very big. But this is very important. And I have a personal experience by an Iranian woman who flew from Greece illegally, not out of the last group of asylum seekers, but a little bit earlier from Iran. She came, a young woman in Greece, and she flew illegally to Norway. And then she was calling us saying that really it is very, very good reception. She had the chance to go on studying, that was she wanted. And we were really very impressed to see how let's say integrated is the welcome, both with work that we cannot have in Greece because we have high unemployment, but still, if the priority is there, it should have been also for these people, and also this allocation around the country, that is very, very important. This would help very much. So these two big difference, if you could say a little bit more when you say. Thank you very much anyway. It was very nice.
Thank you for two very interesting questions and the topics you raise here. The first one in regards to the au pairs and the domestic carers. I think I'm really glad you posted this question because it made me aware of a very important difference, which is the welfare state, which in the Norwegian context is so comprehensive. So we have this stately funded elderly homes where most elderly go, and we also have these kindergartens. We call it like you should be granted a place in the kindergarten. So all children above 2 years are granted a place in the kindergartens, and also after school, public after school arrangement, which are quite cheap. So it's like both that the state has provided for this institution, and also that they are quite cheap so that most people can afford them. So I think this makes a big difference in regards to the au pairs and the carers, because I know there are carers who are also taking care of elderly people who want to stay in their own home, but these numbers are quite low. So at least my impression from the research I did some years ago is at least the au pairs, they look after children, but they look after the children in the hours when the children are not in the kindergarten or at school or after school. So what they do more is home cleaning. And I think that is mostly visible in the upper classes, which have 2-career families, high level of both income, but also status, and the houses and cottages and boats and cars and everything, needing these extra hands to take care of everything so that they can live up to the standards that used to be when there were housewives living at home, but now they are busy doing other things. So that is my impression, that all in all, they do, both au pairs and home cleaners, they do most cleaning and taking care of the mess in the families, mostly the physical mess. But of course, I think there are also possible to find carers in taking care of old people also, but very small numbers still. Still, this au pair arrangement on the home cleaning has been very much criticized, both poorly regulated, very low wages, and it has been incidents of au pairs being really treated so badly that their host families have been put in prison after trial. So it has been, it's a really, they are in such a vulnerable situation. So a few years ago, they introduced a new office in Norway taking care of au pairs in need, because officially you as an au pair, you depend on your host family. So if the contract ends, you need to leave Norway. But now they have tried to make the system a bit more better for the au pair so that they can get a new family and get some support. So that was the first point. The other one about the refugees and the distribution of immigrants, I think this has been, it's maybe like the way I presented it, it is the policies as they want it to be, that the immigrants should be distributed all over the country, including the quite high numbers of unaccompanied migrant youngsters that arrived in 2015 also. And they have tried to do this in all over the countries. What we see now is a challenge, because the numbers of refugees has decreased quite a lot. Like the policies is so strict, but not only in Norway, but also in the rest of Europe. So not so many refugees are arriving in Norway any longer. And what we see now is that these rural areas and the small municipalities that have had refugees for maybe the last 10 years, they are not having any more refugees now. So the centers and the offices, they are closing down, and it's a lot of protests in these small places because they have put so much energy to qualify personnel, to build houses, to make good organizational systems to take care of the immigrants and make good routes for integration. Now it's kind of closing down, which shows that this is quite complicated, because in small places it cannot be as robust as it could in bigger places with more higher numbers. So at least that is something I can add to that.
Thank you, Guro.
Thank you. And now we have comments, questions from Danai Vlahu. And then we have Maria Maratu. You have to, yes.
Excuse me, right the moment that you gave me the possibility to speak, my phone was ringing, so I had to hang up, answer and hang up, because it wouldn't shut up. Thank you, Center for Gender Studies at Panteion University, for this opportunity. And thank you, Guro, for this very interesting presentation that you made. It is pretty obvious that in Norway, the policies in receiving refugees and immigrants is completely different than in Greece. The economy is considered, and the society is considered so as everybody will gain as much as possible from this integration of foreign people and Norwegian people, which is yeah, quite a different story from what we see here. Sadly, in Greece, what we usually experience is basically putting one social group against another in the sense of dividing and conquering. And from that, unfortunately, not even the economy wins in the big picture of a national economy, let's say. But since your presentation was mainly about, well, it was about immigrants and refugees, but what I understood was it's mainly about, say, immigrants. When we talk about immigrants from Europe, it was about immigrants from the Eastern European countries, former Soviet Union countries mainly, that you were talking about. So the rest of possible European immigrants, they're not even considered as immigrants, rather sojourners or expatriates from our various European countries, or the numbers are so minor that there is no point in even mentioning, perhaps. I wouldn't know.
Thank you. The numbers are much lower. I think it's two answers to this. I think the number is much lower. Like 10 years ago, the Swedes would be a huge group of immigrants in the Norwegian society. They would typically not be really regarded as immigrants because we speak the same language or we can understand each other, which makes it so easy and people tend to forget. The same would be with the Danes. What we see now is that the numbers have changed so much so that the Polish people from Lithuania, and also other Eastern European countries, they are so much higher, the numbers. And also, so I think that is, but I think in addition to number, it is because there are kind of more immigrants due to language differences, differences in educational background. There's a lot of more bureaucracy related to work permits and employment. There's quite a lot of discussion in Norway about families of this because there are quite a few children from Eastern Europe in Norwegian schools. They have not been granted language education in the way they would need to. Also, there's quite a lot of worry about all the children left behind. This they call Euro orphans, like a lot of Polish people would be in Norway without children, being taken care of grandparents. So all these discussions would come up in regards to this group, which is not so commonly discussed when it's the Swedes and the Danes. Yeah, when it comes to other European countries like England, France, the numbers are so small. So I'm not an expert in this number, but that would be my theory of why the situation is like this, and that what the discussion is all about.
One last short question. I don't come from a background of social studies. I'm into arts and applied arts. But anyways, do you get a feeling from your studies and from your dealing with this whole society shifting, and that has to do with economy, obviously, and with the changes over the years in the European societies and within the European Union, that things are getting better or worse in relation to immigrants in Norway in general, I mean?
I don't think there is one answer to this. I think in some ways it's getting better, at least for some groups, because some groups are no longer regarded as different. Like it changes. It would be like in the 1970s, Italians would be regarded as black in Norway, which is not the case any longer. They are Norwegian. They are regarded as the same as us. So for some groups it would be different, I think, and better in one way. I think also the Norwegian society is getting much more used to various groups of people, where much more used to talking English than we used to be. You can get a job in Norway without speaking Norwegian. I think you couldn't that, even in, like, you can have a job in this restaurant in Norway without speaking Norwegian. 5 years ago, you couldn't. It would not be acceptable. So some things are changing to the better. At the same time, we know a lot of immigrants are badly treated in the labor market. It's much harder for immigrants to get jobs in Norway than the average population. And also we have this increasing xenophobia and racism also in some areas. I think it's so complicated. And also me, even though I'm talking about these numbers, but my field would be, I have only studied this qualitatively and focusing on this meaning making. And what I see is quite a complicated network of different meaning making going on all the time. So it's very related to context, group of people, where in Norway. So it's quite complicated, I think. But I think all in all, the situation of growing economy, low employment, high employment, like most people who want to have a job, that makes it easy to be positive towards immigration and immigrants.
Thank you, Guro. I would like to ask you some questions as well. But first we have a comment on the chat, which there's a question: what can the role of academics and scholars be in order to intervene essentially through their political organs so that the causes that contribute to push and pull factors will be eliminated? And I would like to ask you some questions as well. So let's group them all together. First of all, I think that what you mentioned about the dispersed refugee settlement programs, it sounds very effective as a project, as a policy. But I was wondering if there is a question about how migrants and refugees connect to each other and how they form communities. Because in our experience in Greece, at least, migrant communities have played a very important role in helping people to integrate in new societies, but also in creating support networks which are really, really important for migrant and refugee groups. This is one question. So if the criteria that determine where people will live are mainly based on the needs of the labor market, what happens to the needs of the people who want to live in their communities? So this is one question. The second question has to do with gender. And you mentioned the different aspects of gender migration, especially in regards to labor. But I was wondering if you have any data, or if you know about refugees. What about reception practices in terms of gender? Is it balanced, or do they? Because it's quite different from what happens in Greece, the asylum procedure in Norway. In Greece, we have a lot of asylum seekers whose first country of entry is Greece. And then we have the European distribution mechanism. So the percentages of asylum seekers in Greece is much higher, but also because it's the first country, basically the Greek state does not have a choice in terms of how many people get accepted. And this leads me to the last question, which has to do with the question of how the burdens of integration are distributed across Europe. And if this is something that is being discussed in the Norwegian context, because it is a very important point from a Greek perspective. How is it that integration and asylum is being addressed at a broader level? Because of course, northern countries have the capacity to limit their numbers according to the labor market needs, but this is not possible in northern countries, which are the first countries of entry. So these are three questions. plus the question by Maria on the chat. If you could address some of them or all of them if you have time.
Thank you so much. This is so interesting. I'll do my best. I'll start with the role of academics. I think if as I see this, I think one very important role academics can do is to provide facts, and due to the with this fact counter some stereotypes and false ideas about immigration and immigrants. Because as I see it in the Norwegian society, there's quite a lot of notions about immigrants and immigration among the ordinary citizens, like in society, that is not necessarily in line with the numbers. So an important role of the academia is to actually do research and provide knowledge so that the ideas we have about immigrants and immigration is in line with actually the situation in society. So in Norway, for example, there would be quite a strong stereotype that most immigrants, more or less, at least most refugees, do not have a job. That would be something quite a few would think, less than before maybe, but still quite a few would think this. And as an academic, we can provide new ideas and create new also imaginaries about what it means to be an immigrant and what immigration can do to the Norwegian society. So that is one, I think. When it comes to your question about redistribution and forming communities, I think this is very important. And this is also what we see, because even though the Norwegian government has this reallocation system of distributing immigrants all over the society, and the rules are, the organization of this is that you need to stay in this society, in the place you are settled for 2 years. Because if you stay there for 2 years, then you will be able to go to school, and you will have payments, like your house will be paid, and you will get some kind of salaries like to live for. After these 2 years, you are expected to be able to finance yourself. And what we quite often see is that and then you can't move before these 2 years, because then you will lose your rights for this support, state finance support. What we see that after 2 years, quite a few do move to cities. Not everyone, and some communities have actually been able to keep the refugees in the local communities, because that would be the aim, at least in rural areas, to keep them there. In particular, families with small children, they really want them to stay. But this is all the time a challenge for the rural society, because if they can't provide jobs, or if the immigrants can't form communities, they would rather go somewhere else. So that is also maybe one of the reasons that the Norwegian government has decided that 2 small municipalities should not receive refugees any longer. And I think it's maybe because I think it's too hard actually for them to be able to form communities and stay put. But this is a constant discussion and debate also. And when it comes to the question about the burdens of immigration, I think this is a discussion in the Norwegian society, and it is a strong pressure, in particularly from socialist parties and those on the far left, that Norway should take a much bigger responsibility for the refugees, for example, in Greece. And it was a big campaign in Norway for the children in Mora, that they thought that the Norwegian government should accept a lot of children coming here. So it was a big campaign. The government, I think they decided to accept 50 children, which was really made fun of from a lot of left-wing politicians and socialist people living in Norway, because they really want the Norwegian government to take much more responsibility. But the political debate on the government level is quite strict. So it's really a hard struggle to open the policies to more immigrants than what we have now, even though the situation is so tough in the other part of Europe. So it's like we have this conservative government, which is really strict. But we have an election in September, and I think this is one of the topics that actually might be of importance in the election.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and the question about gender and asylum and the refugees, is it something you know, if you have a response to that?
I don't really know. My impression is that this, in some cases there are men arriving in Norway first and then the family would come after. But I think it's not that unbalanced, and there's quite a lot of families in Norway. And I think, for example, the rural areas, they really welcome families. So they are popular because they could be part of the society for some time. But among the young unaccompanied migrant adolescent migrants, then there's a lot of boys, very few girls, very few. I guess that's the same in Greece as well.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really interesting. And I think if there are no more questions, we can close the session. It's 1 minute past, half past. So I don't think there are any more questions. Thank you, Guro. Thank you everyone for attending this event. And please subscribe to our Facebook page to get more information about our project and future events. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nelly, for sharing. Thank you, Nelly. It was great. Thank you, Guro.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, Sophia.
Hi.
How are you?